The high hall of the Krell Empire was a place of cold stone and even colder hearts. It was a massive room, built to make anyone inside feel small. Today, Emperor Krell stood at the center, staring at a giant holographic map of the galaxy. Almost the entire map was glowing red. Red meant conquered. Red meant owned by the Krell. For 500 years, the Empire had crushed every species that stood in its way. They had faster ships, bigger guns, and more soldiers than anyone else. But there was one tiny, annoying blue dot left on the edge of the map. It was a small planet called Earth. "I am tired of looking at this blue speck," the Emperor barked. His voice echoed off the high ceilings. "It ruins the view. Why hasn't it been turned red yet?" A young officer stepped forward, trembling. "Sir, the humans, they don't have much. No massive fleets, no giant space stations. They just trade and mind their own business. We didn't think they were worth the fuel to fly there." The Emperor sneered. "Everything is worth owning. Send the message. Give them 24 hours. Tell them to surrender their planet and become our servants, or we will turn their home into a pile of space dust. I want an answer by tomorrow." The officer nodded and pressed a button. The ultimatum was sent. It was a simple, surrender or die, text sent across the stars. The unexpected guest, just as the Emperor turned to leave, the heavy, 10-ton metal doors of the hall slammed open. The sound was like a thunderclap. The Emperor turned around annoyed. "Who dares interrupt me?" It wasn't a human. It was Ambassador Valak of the Vorn. The Vorn were the oldest allies of the Krell. They were a race of lizard, like warriors who loved war. They were brave, tough, and had skin like armor. But today Valak didn't look like a warrior. His scales, usually a bright green, had turned a sickly, pale gray. He was shaking so hard his jewelry was rattling. He didn't walk, he stumbled. He tripped over his own feet and fell to his knees in front of the Emperor. "My lord, stop. You have to stop it," Valak screamed. His voice was cracked with pure terror. The Emperor laughed, a dry, mean sound. "Valak, what is wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. I just sent a surrender demand to those weaklings on Earth. We have millions of ships, they have. What? A few hundred old boats. It will be over in an hour." Valak grabbed the edge of the Emperor's robe, his claws digging into the expensive fabric. "Cancel the message. Pull the fleet back to the home world. Lock the gates. Do it now." The Emperor kicked his hand away. "Don't be a fool. Why are you so scared of a bunch of monkeys who just recently learned how to leave their own atmosphere?" The secret of the ancient records. Valak stayed on the floor, looking up with hollow, haunted eyes. "We found them, Emperor. The ancient records. From the era before your empire was even a dream. My people, we were there during the last Great War." The Emperor folded his arms. "And? Did the humans hide in holes? Did they beg for mercy?" "No," Valak whispered. The room became very cold. "We didn't fight the humans. No one fought them. We just watched. We watched what happened to the species that tried to take their home." The Emperor rolled his eyes. "Tell me, lizard, what happened?" "The species was called the Xylos," Valak said, his voice trembling. "They were bigger than you. They had weapons that could eat stars. They attacked Earth because they wanted the water. They sent a message just like yours, and," the Emperor prompted. "The humans didn't send a fleet to meet them," Valak said, shivering. "They didn't even build shields. They sent a message back that said, 'Please don't.'" The Xylos laughed. They fired their first shot. Valak took a deep breath, looking around the room as if the shadows were listening. In 3 days, the Xylos didn't just lose the war. They disappeared. Not just their soldiers, their history. Their buildings turned to sand. Their sun was put out like a candle. The humans don't fight for land, Emperor. They don't fight for glory or gold. They are a quiet people. They like their coffee, their dogs, and their movies. He leaned in closer, his voice a frantic whisper. "But if you threaten their home, if you threaten their children, they stop being people. They become a natural disaster. You can't negotiate with a hurricane. You can't shoot a landslide. That is what a human is when they are angry." The point of no return, the Emperor stood silent for a second. Then he let out a loud, booming laugh. "A natural disaster. Valak, you've been reading too many fairy tales. They are flesh and blood. My lasers will burn them just like anyone else." "You don't understand," Valak cried out. "The humans have a saying. They say, 'Beware the fury of a patient man.' They have been patient for 1,000 years. You just woke them up." The Emperor pointed to the screen. "It is too late anyway. The message has been received. Look." The holographic map was glitching. The red areas were flickering. Suddenly, every screen in the high hall, thousands of them, went pitch black. The lights in the palace dimmed. The hum of the oxygen machine stopped. The golden statues of the Emperor's ancestors seemed to shiver in the dark. Then, one by one, the screens turned back on. But there was no map. There were no faces. In the center of every screen, in plain, boring, white text, were 7 words. They weren't written in the Krell language. They were written in English. Message received. We are coming to collect. The first debt. The Emperor felt a tiny prickle of sweat on the back of his neck.
Technician, fix the screens? Trace that signal? I can't.
Sir, a voice called out from the darkness of the control pit. The signal isn't coming from space. It's coming from inside our own computers. It's like it was already there, just waiting for us to send that message. Outside the palace, the citizens of the Empire looked up at the sky. The stars were bright and beautiful. But then, one by one, the stars started to go out. It wasn't clouds. It was something blocking the light. Something huge. The Emperor looked at Valak, who was now curled into a ball on the floor, weeping. They are coming, Valak whispered. And they aren't coming to surrender. The Emperor looked back at the screen. The white text changed. It now showed a countdown timer. 20:30, 59:58, 20:30, 9:88, 57. The humans were giving the Empire 24 hours. Not to surrender, but to say goodbye. The debt was about to be paid, and the Krell Empire had no idea how expensive it was going to be. The first 6 hours after the message were strangely peaceful. In the high hall of the Krell Empire, the Emperor sat on his throne, swirling a glass of expensive purple wine. He looked at the countdown on the screen on 7:59:42. You see Valak, the Emperor shouted toward the heavy, reinforced bunker doors where the Vorn ambassador had hidden himself. The humans are doing exactly what I expected. They are frozen. They are terrified. They are probably spending their last hours crying and hugging their pets. There was no answer from the bunker. The Emperor laughed and turned to his generals. They haven't even moved a single ship. Our sensors show Earth is quiet. People are going to work. They are buying groceries. They aren't even putting on armor. These are the natural disasters you were so afraid of. The generals laughed along with him. They felt powerful. They felt untouchable. They began to plan the victory parade they would hold on the streets of Earth once the 24 hours were up. They talked about which human buildings they would tear down and which ones they would keep as trophies. But then, at exactly the 7th hour, the laughter stopped. The vanishing outposts. A young technician, a boy barely out of the academy, stood up from his desk. His face was white as a sheet. Sir, something is wrong with Outpost 9. Outpost 9 was a massive space station on the very edge of the Empire. It was the size of a small moon and housed over 50,000 soldiers. It was protected by the best shields money could buy. Did they attack? The Emperor asked, setting his wine glass down. Did the humans finally show up with their little pea shooters? No, sir, the technician whispered, his hands shaking on the keyboard. It didn't blow up. There was no explosion, no heat signature, no distress signal. It's just gone. The Emperor walked over to the giant tactical map. The red light that represented Outpost 9 was blinking. Then it simply vanished. What do you mean gone? The Emperor demanded. A station that big doesn't just disappear. Check the sensors again. Maybe the cloaking device glitched. Sir, I've checked everything, the technician said, tears of frustration in his eyes. I sent a drone to the coordinates. There is nothing there. No metal scraps. No bodies. No floating debris. It's like the station was never built. It's just empty space. Before the Emperor could respond, another light on the map went dark. Then another. Outpost 12 is gone. The mining colony on Sector 4 is dark. The fuel depot at the Nebula, it's gone, sir. It's all disappearing. The gravity anchors. The Emperor felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This wasn't war. In a war, things broke. Things burned. There were screams and fire. This was something else. This was silence.
Get the science division on the line now,
he screamed. A holographic projection of the chief scientist appeared. The man looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. My lord, we've analyzed the last bit of data from Sector 4 before it vanished. The humans aren't using lasers. They aren't using missiles. Then what are they using? They are using something we only thought was a theory, the scientist said, his voice trembling. They call them gravity anchors. They aren't shooting at our ships. They are folding the space around our ships. They are literally making the reality where our bases exist. They are moving our people into a void where time doesn't exist. They aren't fighting us, they are erasing us from the timeline. The Emperor looked at the map. It was like watching a giant eraser move across a chalkboard. The red glow was being wiped away inch by inch. Every time a light went out, thousands of Krell lives simply ceased to be. The Allies run. The Emperor grabbed the communication headset. Call our allies. Tell the Zog fleet to move in. Tell the Iron Legion to protect the capital. We pay them billions for protection. Tell them to earn it. The screen flickered, and the face of the Zog High Commander appeared. He wasn't on his throne. He was on the bridge of his ship, and behind him, the stars were moving fast. He was in warp. Emperor Krell, the Zog leader, said, his voice flat and cold. Our treaty was very clear. We agreed to help you fight enemies we can see. We agreed to fight soldiers made of meat and bone. We did not agree to fight ghosts who can fold the universe like a piece of paper. You coward, the Emperor spat. You are leaving me. No, the Zog leader replied. I am surviving. My sensors just picked up a single human scout ship near my border. Do you know what the pilot did? He didn't fire a weapon, he just waved. And then my entire defense grid turned itself off. My ships won't fire. My computers won't lock on. The humans have already won, Krell. You poked a sleeping star, and now the whole galaxy is going to burn because of your ego. Good luck, you're going to need it. The screen went black. The Zog were gone. The Iron Legion followed. By the 12th hour, the Krell Empire, the greatest force in the galaxy, was standing completely alone. The closing sky, the Emperor walked to the massive balcony of his palace. He looked up at the sky of his home planet. It was a beautiful night. Usually, he could see the thousands of ships orbiting the planet, their lights looking like second stars. But tonight, the ships were gone. And the stars were different. Sir, the technician whispered from behind him. The humans, they've arrived in our system? Where? The Emperor asked, looking around. I don't see any fleets. Look up, sir. Past the atmosphere. The Emperor looked. A giant dark shape was moving across the moon. It wasn't a ship, it was a shadow. It was so big it blocked out the entire constellation of the Great Hunter. Then, another shadow appeared. And another. They weren't attacking. They were just there. They were like giant curtains being drawn across the window of the universe. They are closing the sky, the Emperor whispered. Suddenly, a voice echoed throughout the entire planet. It didn't come from a speaker. It didn't come from a radio. It felt like it was coming from inside the very bones of everyone on the planet. It was a calm, human voice. You have 12 hours left, the voice said. It sounded like a father talking to a child who had made a very big mistake. We gave you 24 hours to think. You spent the first 6 laughing. You spent the next 6 watching your power vanish. Now you will spend the final 12 in the dark. With a sudden snap, every light on the planet went out, not just the palace, not just the cities. Every flashlight, every candle, every glowing screen died. The Emperor stood in total, absolute darkness. He couldn't even see his own hands. He reached out, touching the cold stone of his balcony, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. From the bunker, he finally heard the voice of the Vorn ambassador. It was a low, sad moan. The silence. Valak whispered through the vents. That's the worst part. When humans are loud, they are just angry. But when they are silent, that's when they are deciding if you deserve to exist at all. The Emperor leaned against the wall, his heart drumming against his ribs. He looked up where the stars used to be, but there was only blackness. The humans hadn't fired a single shot at his palace, yet he felt more defeated than if they had dropped 1,000 bombs. The clock was still ticking in his head. 11s and 59:59, 11s and 59:58. The debt was being collected, and the Emperor realized he didn't have enough soul left to pay it. The final hours of the countdown were the loudest silence the Empire had ever known. The capital planet, once a shining jewel of neon lights and humming engines, was now a graveyard of cold metal. The Emperor sat on his throne, his hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles turned white. He was waiting for the fire. He was waiting for the end. At the 20th hour, the sky didn't explode. It didn't turn red with laser fire. Instead, the darkness simply became heavy. 12 shadows descended through the clouds. They weren't the jagged, scary warships of the Krell. They were smooth, matte, black giants, each one the size of a sprawling city. They moved without sound, floating over the capital like massive, sleeping whales. They didn't have glowing engines. They didn't have visible guns. They just existed. They absorbed the very light around them, making the day look like a permanent twilight. The heartbeat of Earth. Suddenly, every communication device on the planet, even the ones that were broken or turned off, began to vibrate. It wasn't a message at first. It was a sound. Thump, 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 thump. It was the steady, rhythmic sound of a human heartbeat. It played through the speakers in the palace, the radios in the streets, and even the mental telepathy links used by the high priests. It was calm. It was peaceful. And to the Krell, it was the most terrifying thing they had ever heard. It was the sound of a predator that wasn't even breathing hard. Then, the voice came. It wasn't the scream of a conqueror. It was a tired, soft voice of a man who had better things to do. You asked for our surrender, the voice said, echoing across the globe. We thought about it. We checked our history books. We checked our laws. We have decided to decline your offer. In fact, we've decided that you've had enough toys for one civilization. We are taking back the piece you stole from the galaxy. The powerless empire, fire! The Emperor screamed, losing his mind. Shoot them down. Use the planetary cannons. Destroy them. The elite guards, men who had won 1,000 battles, scrambled to their stations. They aimed the massive, God-killer, cannons at the floating black ships. These cannons were designed to crack planets in half. The guards pressed the firing buttons with everything they had. Nothing happened. The human ships didn't even put up shields. They didn't dodge. A small, invisible pulse ripple came from the lead ship. It hit the planet like a soft breeze. Instantly, the cannons didn't just stop working, they died. The metal turned cold. The computer screens flickered once and turned into static. The lights in the high hall, which had been running on emergency power, vanished. The mighty Krell Empire was suddenly living in the Stone Age. Their high-tech armor became heavy, useless junk. Their plasma rifles became expensive clubs. The visitor, the doors to the high hall didn't blast open this time. They simply slid open, moved by hand. The Emperor heard footsteps. Click, click, click. The sound of rubber soles on stone. No metal boots, no heavy armor. Just a man walking. Just small light appeared, a simple battery-powered flashlight. It cut through the darkness of the throne room, landing right on the Emperor's terrified face. The man holding the light was wearing a simple, olive, green flight suit. He had a patch on his shoulder that showed a blue marble Earth. He looked like a mechanic or a delivery driver, not a god of war. In his other hand, he held a wrinkled piece of paper. It was the original surrender demand the Emperor had sent. Do you know how much fuel it took to get 12 city ships out here? The human asked. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. It's a long trip. We were right in the middle of a national holiday, too. My kids are going to miss the fireworks because of this. The Emperor trembled, his crown sliding sideways on his head.
What? What do you want? Take the gold. Take the colonies. Just don't kill us.
The human walked up the steps of the throne. The elite guards tried to move, but they found they couldn't. Their own nervous systems felt heavy, as if the human's presence was literally holding them in place. The human looked at the Emperor with eyes that weren't angry. They were just bored. We don't want your gold, man. We have asteroids made of diamond back home. We don't want your colonies. We like our own sun just fine. He leaned in close, the flashlight illuminating the Emperor's sweating face. We want you to watch. We want you to see what happens when you try to bully the galaxy. The great erasing. The human reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, plastic remote. It looked like something you would use to open a garage door. He pressed a single red button. Look out the window, the human said. The Emperor stumbled to the balcony. In the sky, the Empire's massive war moons, the symbols of their ultimate power, were sitting in orbit. They were supposed to be indestructible. They didn't explode. An explosion would have been a mercy. Instead, the war moons began to shimmer. They looked like a drawing being rubbed out by a giant eraser. The metal didn't melt. It just turned into fine, gray dust. The weapons, the engines, the billions of tons of steel, it all unraveled. In less than 5 minutes, the sky was clear. The one destructible fleet was gone. It wasn't destroyed, it was unbuilt. The humans had used their gravity technology to return the metal to the universe. 1 billion years of military history was turned into a pretty cloud of space dust. The final lesson, the human turned around and started walking back toward the door. Wait! The Emperor cried out, his voice breaking. You're just leaving? You've taken everything? We have no ships, no power, no way to feed our people. The human stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. You still have your lives. That's more than you gave the people of Sector 4. You still have your dirt and your trees. Figure it out. He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. The Vorn ambassador warned you. He told you to stay away from the quiet ones. You thought we were weak because we didn't have a giant army. You forgot that the reason we don't have a giant army is because we don't need one. We solved the problem of war a long time ago. We just didn't want to show the galaxy how we did it. The human dropped the wrinkled surrender paper on the floor. From now on, Earth is the only name you need to remember. If we hear your name in the stars again, if we see one Krell ship leave this atmosphere with a weapon on it, we won't come back with 12 ships. We'll just turn your sun off for a weekend. Stay in the dark, the human said quietly, and think about your choices. The human stepped out. A few seconds later, the 12 city ships in the sky simply blinked. One moment they were there, and the next the stars were visible again. But the stars looked different now. They looked cold. They looked like eyes watching. The Emperor fell to the floor in the pitch-black hall. He reached out, feeling the cold stone of his palace. He was still the emperor of a planet, but he was no longer the master of anything. The Vorn ambassador was right. You can fight a soldier. You can outsmart a general, but you cannot survive a natural disaster. And as the emperor sat in the dark, listening to the silence of his dead empire, he finally understood humanity wasn't a player in the galactic game. They were the ones who owned the board. The debt was paid in full, and the price was the end of an era.